I'm very honored to be joined on the Freedom Side Live by Valerie Fink. She is a freelance photojournalist in Saskatchewan. Valerie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me, Rania.
Now, the reason we have you on is because you very publicly resigned from your work at Reuters, and you had a very important tweet where you put out a statement that's so good. And I'm just going to read the tweet part of it, and then we can talk a little bit more about what you said. But you tweeted, "I can't in good conscience continue to work for Reuters, given their portrayal of journalists in Gaza and culpability in the assassination of 245 of our colleagues." And we're recording this a day after you posted that tweet that's now gone quite viral. And I think it says a lot that it's received so many likes and been reshared so many times. So, Valerie, I just wanted to ask you, after 8 years at Reuters as a stringer, as you've said, you've made this I'm sure it was a difficult decision to publicly resign and protest over its role in, enabling Israel's killings, intentional murders of Palestinian journalists. So I'm just curious if you could talk a little bit about, what was going through your mind here and what was that final breaking point for you?
I mean, I've been outspoken about Palestine for many years now, including before I started working as a photojournalist. And I've been openly critical of Reuters' coverage and Western media's coverage of the genocide more generally. But the breaking point for me was really the assassination of Anas Al-Sharif and the Gaza City Al Jazeera crew. I'd been following Anas Al-Sharif throughout the genocide. I watched him when he took off his press vest after the ceasefire and was hoisted onto the shoulders of his colleagues and thinking that he'd survived, and I shared his plea for protection when it became clear that he was on an IDF hit list. And I read the final words and testament that he had written when he knew that he was going to die, and that just broke me. These are some of, I think, not just the best journalists that have ever lived. Like, these are the best human beings, and that loss to me is just unbearable. It's all unbearable, but I think at that point, I just couldn't conceive of having a relationship with Reuters any longer, reading their coverage of that story, dignifying this claim that these were not in fact journalists, they were members of the resistance and therefore had to die. It's reprehensible, I don't need to tell you that. And that was the point at which I made that decision. And, to be honest, I'm a freelancer in Western Canada. I don't cover international stories. Most of the stories that I cover about things like drought or particularly cold winters in the prairies, I didn't think anyone would really notice or care, to be honest. But I thought that if this was, something that would have meaning as a gesture of solidarity and of refusal, then it's the least that I could do.
I think it definitely made an impact. 23,000 retweets and 73,000 likes on a post that you probably didn't think would get that much traction, but it did, and it speaks to something. And just to point to the point you were making about the way Reuters covered Anas's killing, I believe it was the headline, right? It was something like Israel kills Al Jazeera journalist who they say is Hamas. It was basically like that.
Exactly. And this is
Yeah.
typical, right? And we're seeing this even now after the bombing of Nasser Hospital, right? The headline is always the IDF statement, comma, Israel says, right? That's always what leads. That's always the framework. When there's zero evidence whatsoever to substantiate the zero independent investigation. And yeah, that's been longstanding even before the genocide. And
I just want to, sorry, about the killing you were just referencing was the five journalists that were killed. Many of them were Reuters journalists. And I actually didn't see Reuters coverage of that. Did they also do the same thing where it was like Israel says, even though it was their own
exactly. Yeah, they've
journalists?
said, I forget, I don't have the exact headline in front of me right now, but it's, essentially saying that the strike was targeting a Hamas camera, Israel says, right? And what do we even say about that? Let's say that it was a Hamas camera, which it wasn't. then you bomb a hospital and you kill 20 people to target a perfectly normal thing to do. No big deal. I mean, it's a travesty. It's unforgivable, right?
It absolutely is. And I also wanted to ask you, with regard to Reuters failing to essentially defend Anas, because by repeating Israeli lies about him, they're failing to defend him. And then you pointed out in your statement how his work won them a Pulitzer Prize. Um, and then going so far as to dignify this Israeli propaganda after his murder. I guess I'm just curious your thoughts on what that says about the priorities of Western media when it comes to Palestinian lives specifically, even those working within their own institutions.
Yeah, I mean, we know that the priority of these institutions is to generate profit, right? That's their priority first and foremost, and they're driven by financial interests. They're driven by advertising, and that's how they're structured, right? They've never cared about Palestinian lives. They don't care about Black lives. They don't care about Indigenous lives. And regardless of the individual journalists working for these institutions, and I've heard from so many of them over the past 24 hours, more than I can count, including from Reuters, like despite their best intentions and efforts, those are subsumed by these structures that they work in, right? Um,
Yeah. I mean, I'm also just reminded thinking of Reuters that and very early on after October 7th, it wasn't just Palestinian journalists. The Israelis targeted a convoy of journalists in the south of Lebanon, and they killed Reuters correspondent Isam Abdullah. And that was very early on. And also their coverage of that was very similar. Israel says, I mean, his family was very angry about that. It was a huge story here in Lebanon. Valerie, you described the Western media in the statement that you put on Twitter as a conveyor belt for Israeli propaganda, essentially helping to legitimize genocide. So, having been inside an outlet like Reuters at times for many, many years, I'm curious, why do you think so many outlets like Reuters are willing to abandon even the most basic journalistic standards when it comes specifically to this issue?
yeah, I mean, I should say those are Jeremy Scahill's words from Dropsite News I quoted in my statement, but I think that they're bang on. Um, I mean, the pressure is obviously immense on Western media. And I know certainly in Canada with organizations like Honest Reporting Canada, which is a registered charity here, incredibly, and swiftly mobilizes incitement campaigns of harassment and doxing against journalists who are even nominally critical of Israel. And then we see, subsequent retractions and apologies. Recently, the Globe and Mail here just apologized for using the term forced starvation. No, actually, it's a humanitarian crisis. There are many factors, right, following pressure on them. And I know, even on a small scale, where I live in Saskatchewan, I have friends who work as TV broadcasters. And if they have a story not even critical of Israel, just presenting kind of basic facts of what's happening in the genocide, they have people show up in person at the media offices demanding to speak to management, essentially occupying offices and demanding retractions, demanding apology. So that pressure is immense. It's real. But again, I mean, these institutions are structurally designed to represent the interests of the powerful. And it's not just a matter of that pressure, but it certainly does play an important role, and that self-censorship is internalized, I think, and embedded in these institutions, particularly when it comes to Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, that's an insane amount just to imagine somebody coming in person and occupying an office until they get a retraction. Um, you also said in the statement that you basically feel you can no longer wear a press pass without feeling some sort of deep shame and grief, and that you want to honor the courage of Palestinian journalists. And so I'm just curious, what does that look like for you moving forward? And as kind of a message to maybe other journalists who might be watching and having the same feelings that you're having, what would that sort of true journalistic solidarity with Gaza require, in your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's possible within these major media outlets. I know people are trying. They're not succeeding for the most part, as we're seeing. I don't know what that looks like other than abandoning them. I mean, certainly there's no shortage of incredible work that's happening in alternative media. Um, breakthrough news, obviously, but so many examples, electronic intifada and Dropset, like there's incredible journalism that's happening outside of these big media institutions, and they deserve all of our support. And obviously amplifying the voices of journalists on the ground in Gaza as best we can. But outside of journalism and media, like I think we also have to be active in these movements, pushing for sanctions, pushing for an arms embargo. I mean, even in Canada, we're still sending weapons to Israel. Like, we have to stop the genocide, not just report on it, not just talk about what's happening. We have to sever our ties. We have to stop our government's enabling of this to continue.
Valerie, I want to thank you so much, first of all, for what you did in speaking out, but also for joining us here on the Freedom Side Live. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for the opportunity, Rania. It's my honor.